Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. EAJA was originally designed to help sort of ordinary citizens who successfully challenge government overreach recover their legal costs. It recognizes that not every veteran or retiree has the resources to take on the federal government. Yet radical environmentalists have exploited EAJA and environmental laws to turn litigation into a business model and a policy achiever. Mr. Wood, question for you. Can litigation impose environmental, operational, or wildfire risk costs even when the fee award itself looks modest?
Absolutely. In my written testimony, I talk about a case in my own backyard, Bozeman, Montana, where a needed forest restoration project that was designed to protect our drinking water supply from a wildfire that if it were to burn through that area would give us just 3 days of drinking water, was held up for over a decade due to NEPA objections and litigation. Ultimately, that litigation, while it prevailed, produced no change to the project. It purely produced delay, which left us, the town, vulnerable. The only real beneficiary from it was the nonprofit group that was paid several times its annual budget in attorney's fees.
Yeah. I know you're an experienced litigator. Can you explain how a plaintiff can obtain attorney's fees even when the lawsuit doesn't produce any real substantive environmental improvement?
Most of these cases are procedural cases. So you're arguing that an agency should have analyzed some question in more detail without having to show that that additional detail would change the result. So the Cottonwood case that I was just describing is actually not that unusual. We have a lot of cases that drag on for years, require an agency to do some extra level analysis, but at the end of the day, the underlying action proceeds as planned, just years delayed.
So attorney's fees are most often discussed in the context of lawsuits against the federal government. Statutes like the ESA allow citizen suits to be brought against private parties and states. Mr. Wood, can you explain how ESA fee shifting can affect states, private landowners, businesses, permittees, project proponents, even when the federal government is not the defendant?
Thank you, and that is a really important question. It's been mostly overlooked to this point. Some of these laws apply to private parties where one-way fee shifting, so the defendant may have to pay, but the laws, the plaintiff having to pay if the case fails is not there, can be incredibly coercive. We don't know the scale of that problem because many defendants understandably want to keep the amount they're paying confidential so as to not attract more lawsuits, but it is a very serious problem that creates this mismatch in power between the two sides.
So attorney's fees and fundraising off of lawsuits have turned litigation into a cash cow for some of these ENGOs. And Mr. Wood, your testimony highlights sort of this perverse incentive by ENGOs to litigate rather than investing directly in on-the-ground conservation efforts, and you mentioned that, an example of that in your testimony. What tools does Congress have to reform these incentives, and how can these reform incentives create better results for the environment?
So I think the biggest thing is that the reasonableness of attorney's fees should be a more full analysis. Right now, it's the only question is there some lawyer in the world, environmental lawyer in the world, that could make this rate? And instead, courts should look at, is this reasonable in light of what was achieved in the litigation? What are the alternatives that could produce similar environmental benefits? Currently, none of that happens, but any realistic person that was making a litigation decision would obviously include that in their reasonableness analysis.
Yeah. And Mr. Wood, have you seen examples of groups that are, the group itself is essentially a lawyer and maybe a legal aid or something, and that's the extent of the group itself?
Yeah, the case I mentioned out of Bozeman, the Cottonwood Environmental Law Center brought that case against a forest restoration project. It's a very small nonprofit. Their annual budget is pretty small. It's essentially a staff of 1 or 2. It varies over time. And through outside help and the fact that their staff is an attorney, they bring quite a few cases. They essentially exist to litigate. And there are other groups that are obviously larger than that is what they do. And so my biggest concern here is not just the risk of overpayment, but what are the on-the-ground conservation projects that aren't happening? Because federal policy is telling groups, sue, instead of prioritizing meaningful impact on the ground.
Yeah, the ranking member of the full committee earlier said that Republicans, or our side of the aisle, gets upset because sometimes environmental groups win. I think we get upset because many times environmental groups are fleecing the American taxpayer. Thank you, Mr. Wood, and I yield back.